This video is about the leading cause of lawnmower engine failure. The leading cause of engine failure in small engines, more often than not, is caused by sitting over the winter. The lawnmower is placed into a garage or into a shed, and the fuel in the fuel system begins to evaporate away, and you're left with the gums and tars that are naturally in gasoline, which settle in the low parts of the fuel system. More often than not, it's in the fuel bowl or the carburetor bowl. This is a real mild case. This engine actually started, but surged and didn't run properly. So I'm going to show you some areas that I found here on this one. As you can see, the bowl is very clean. That's unusual for one that's been sitting up. Usually you have something 1/8 of an inch deep of just crust in the bottom of these bowls. And that also gets into the jet, the main jet. The main jet on this carburetor is actually the nut that holds it on to the bottom of the carburetor. It goes on like this. You notice a gasket goes through the hole. This O-ring goes on the carburetor body. This threads down over it, holds it down. Now that nut holds down the bowl, but it's also the main jet. You can see a small hole there in the middle. Fuel enters through that hole there on the side and comes through that metering restriction right here in the center of the nut. And oftentimes those are plugged up with gums and tars. This one here looks pretty clean. This engine wasn't running exactly perfect, but it did start up for me. Another thing to always check: plastic float. Make sure there's no fuel in it. If there's fuel in that, replace it. It'll cause the carburetor to flood. This is the inlet needle. That allows the fuel to come in from the fuel tank and fill the carburetor bowl. It goes in this hole right here. And then the float allows that to open and close. As the fuel is burned out of the fuel bowl, the float will drop and allow more fuel to enter into the bowl. Now, one thing you got to notice on these, one of 3 kinds actually. Here's the inlet needle, and you'll notice it's just all metal. That usually means that there's a rubber seat inside the hole. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it. It might be red or black in color, sometimes white. It's a Viton seat that sits down in there, and that's where the needle seats to turn the fuel off. Sometimes you need to go in there and replace it, particularly if the engine's been run with ethanol fuel. They tend to swell up, and it restricts the fuel from the tank going into the bowl. The other thing you got to watch out for, especially on one that's been sitting up, is a fouled spark plug. This one here is not in too bad a shape, but I have a habit of taking them out, cleaning them, re-gapping them, and putting them back in. This one here, you notice one thing that it has. That's the air bleed, and it's stopped up with gums and tars. That needs to be opened up, and that may explain why it wasn't running exactly right. Sometimes when you have one of these plugged, you'll have a pop, pop, pop in the exhaust, or sometimes a surge. So that needs to be cleaned out. The rest of it actually is not in too bad a condition. This is a Briggs and Stratton engine I'm working on. It has an automatic choke. Works off a bimetallic spring that sits above the cylinder. It has a little air vane that when the engine fires, it actually pushes the choke up, open. And then as the engine heats up, the bimetallic spring opens the choke fully. It's a pretty simple carburetor. It doesn't have any idle circuits in it. Usually idle circuits are seen when you open the throttle you'll see very small holes in the throat of it right behind the butterfly. And sometimes you'll notice there's a Welch plug here that covers the holes where they drilled through to get the idle circuits and intermediate circuits in there. This is a very simple one here. It doesn't have any of that. In here, where the jet screws in, you will see a brass tube. That's the discharge nozzle that's stuck in there. And that area there leads up to this air bleed. This is where the air and fuel mixes, right in this chamber here before it's discharged into the venturi. So a simple way to clean these carburetors up, take them apart and inspect them. Make sure you don't have any cracks. Take your plastic parts off, and all the metal parts are going to go into a carburetor cleaner like this. You can usually put them in there overnight. That'll totally clean out any of the varnish, gums, tars, anything that was in the gasoline. They'll clean all the jets and any of the air bleed circuits out, idle circuits. When you get done with that, you take the carburetor out. I usually brush it off with some mineral spirits, and then I take regular spray carb cleaner and I go through all the metering jets, air bleeds, vents, and make certain that they're all open. The other thing you want to do too is inspect your air filter. This air filter here is in good condition. You can see a little dirt on it, so that's totally okay to reuse. And when you get into the carburetor, of course, you're going to have to take off the air cleaner assembly, which I did. You see it has quite a bit of dirt in the back. I want to clean out everything on here, put on a new gasket. This tube right here, it goes to this rubber piece here. It's a little intermediate tube that goes over to the crankcase breather. That's important for that to stay open. Otherwise the engine will consume oil. The other thing you never want to do on one of these Briggs and Strattons is let your air filter get too clogged up. When they get real clogged up, it starts bringing oil out of the crankcase through the breather here, and it totally floods the carburetor and the air filter with oil. At that time the engine usually stops because the filter's just plugged up completely with oil and dirt. So that's a general rundown on what usually goes wrong with these small engines. Sitting is the worst thing you could ever let happen to a small engine. The very best thing you could do to maintain a small engine is keep it full of fuel at all times, and once a month in the wintertime, start it until the engine fully warms up. Make certain that it's still full of fuel, and push it back into the garage. Just keeping it running is the key to preventing all of this problem. Now we're going to go over to the lawnmower, and I'm going to show you what the lawnmower looks like, and then where the carburetor installs it. This is the lawnmower here. It's a Craftsman. It's almost brand new. Has hardly any time on it at all. You can see here the carburetor installs on the side of this plate here, and has an O-ring that seals it on the intake side. This is the crankcase breather tube that interfaces with that rubber tube that goes onto the back of the air cleaner assembly. It's important to have that connected. That'll keep dirt out of your air filter. And then this is the fuel line that comes from the fuel tank here. I have a little bit of fuel in it, so I just disconnected it and I put a bolt, put the clamp back on it to keep it from leaking. Now this engine here has a throttle control, which is a little unusual. Most small engines nowadays have fixed throttles. This one actually you can idle it down. I run high speed as well, and you can run whatever speed you want actually. And the reason it's like that, this one has a blade clutch on it, so it'll actually idle with the blade turned off, and then there's a lever that you pull up here. This lever here, you see the little safety latch it has, you push that down, pull it back, and that actually engages the blade. Pretty nice setup though, you don't have to always turn it off every time you want to stop. Here's the throttle. And then this lever here is actually the drive. This is a rear wheel drive. It's a Craftsman lawnmower, by the way, with a Briggs and Stratton engine. And the other thing on this one, you'll notice it has the automatic choke that I talked about. This spring attaches to the air vane here, and there's a little bimetallic spring. Actually, I believe this one don't have it. This one actually doesn't have the little bimetallic spring. I don't think. It might. Most of them do. But at any rate, this spring holds the choke closed, and when the engine fires air off of the magneto fan, pushes the air vane open, pushes the choke open, so the engine will run. Okay, and more than likely I'll make a second part of this video after I clean the carburetor and everything up, and I'll show how the engine runs when we get finished. Thanks for watching.